A shogun's most trusted retainer draws no sword in the palace corridor. Instead, he studies a stranger's eyes and reads murder in them before a single hand moves. Yagyu Munenori's greatest kill was the one he never needed to make. What kind of swordsman wins battles no one sees? He trained 2 shoguns in the art of the sword. He wrote the book that still defines Japanese swordsmanship today. But his most famous lesson wasn't about killing. It was about learning exactly when to stop your hand. By the early 1600s, Japan's centuries of civil war had finally ended. Tokugawa Ieyasu had unified the country, and his descendants now needed something rarer than battlefield victory. A way to keep the peace among tens of thousands of restless samurai who had known nothing but war. Into this new world stepped Yagyu Munenori, heir to a swordsmanship tradition called Shinkage-ryu, a man whose family had served warlords for generations. He was about to become something unprecedented, the shogun's personal teacher, not in the art of war, but in the art of not needing it. Munenori's father, Yagyu Muneyoshi, had once demonstrated his skill before Tokugawa Ieyasu himself, disarming an armed attacker using nothing but empty hands, a technique called mutodori. Ieyasu was so impressed, he made the Yagyu family his personal sword instructors. Munenori inherited this position and expanded it dramatically, eventually teaching not one shogun, but 3 generations of them: Ieyasu, Hidetada, and Iemitsu. No other swordsman in Japanese history held that kind of unbroken access to the absolute center of power. But Munenori was not merely a fencing coach. He served the Tokugawa shogunate as a metsuke, an intelligence officer, tasked with monitoring the loyalty of powerful lords across Japan. He also received a rare invitation from a Zen monk named Takuan Soho, who began teaching him that swordsmanship and spiritual discipline were, at their core, the same pursuit. The sword, Takuan argued, was not a tool for taking life. Properly understood, it was a tool for preserving it, for the wielder and for everyone around him. This idea transformed how Munenori thought about his art. He began to formalize a philosophy he called Katsujinken, the sword that gives life, as opposed to Setsunito, the sword that takes life. A swordsman who could only kill was, in his view, a crude craftsman. A true master understood that the highest skill was preventing violence altogether, reading intention before it became action, and diffusing conflict before a blade ever left its scabbard. This was a radically different definition of mastery for an age built on the sword. In 1632, Munenori compiled these ideas into a text called the Heiho Kadensho, the life-giving sword, a family transmission scroll meant to teach the deepest secrets of Shinkage-ryu swordsmanship to his most trusted students. But the book went far beyond technique. It discussed psychology, timing, the nature of fear, and how a disciplined mind could perceive an opponent's next move before the opponent himself was aware of it. It would go on to become one of the most influential texts on martial philosophy ever written in Japan. Central to the Heiho Kadensho was a concept Munenori called the sickness of abiding. The idea that a mind fixated on any single thing, whether fear, anger, or even the desire to win, became slow and predictable. A truly skilled swordsman kept his mind moving like water, attaching to nothing, so that he could respond instantly to whatever actually happened, rather than what he expected to happen. This idea, drawn partly from his conversations with Takuan, would later influence not just swordsmanship, but Japanese aesthetics, business philosophy, and sport far beyond the battlefield. As shogunal intelligence officer, Munenori's greatest tests rarely involved a blade at all. Edo Castle was a nest of ambition, daimyo lords jockeying for favor, rivals spreading rumors, and constant undercurrents of potential rebellion in a country only a generation removed from open war. Munenori's role was to sense danger before it materialized, to walk through a room and know from posture and breath and the placement of a hand whether a man intended harm. It was the Heiho Kadensho, applied not to combat, but to survival in a court of shifting loyalties. There is a story, likely embellished by later generations, but revealing of his reputation nonetheless, that a would-be assassin sent to test or eliminate the Shogun's sword instructor approached Munenori in a castle corridor with murder concealed in his heart. Munenori is said to have stopped, turned, and looked directly at the man, not with alarm, but with total, unblinking awareness. The assassin, the story goes, felt his intention read instantly and understood that any attack would fail before it began. He turned and left without a word exchanged. Munenori's influence grew alongside his student, Tokugawa Iemitsu, who became the third shogun in 1623. Iemitsu trusted Munenori not only with his physical training, but increasingly with matters of state, eventually appointing him to senior administrative positions rarely held by a mere swordsman. It was an extraordinary rise for a man whose family only decades earlier had been minor provincial retainers fighting for survival in Japan's endless civil wars. The sword that gives life had, quite literally, given Munenori a life beyond anything his ancestors could have imagined. Yet Munenori understood something dangerous about his position that many in his place would have missed. That his true power came not from the sword he carried, but from the restraint he showed in never needing to use it. In a court where a wrong word or a drawn blade could end a family's fortunes for generations, Munenori's genius was perpetual disciplined stillness. Every day he served, he balanced on a blade's edge sharper than any weapon in his collection. One wrong instinct, one moment of the sickness of abiding, and everything he had built could collapse in an instant. In his final years, Munenori continued teaching and refining the Shinkage-ryu tradition, ensuring it would survive him. His son, Yagyu Mitsuyoshi, became a legendary swordsman in his own right, and stories of the family, some true, many exaggerated into folklore, would eventually turn the Yagyu name into shorthand for the ultimate Japanese swordmaster in later fiction, film, and popular imagination. But Munenori himself, by all contemporary accounts, remained precisely what his philosophy demanded: quiet, watchful, and entirely uninterested in spectacle. Yagyu Munenori died in 1646, having served 3 generations of shoguns without ever being drawn into the plots, purges, and executions that consumed so many of his contemporaries at the Tokugawa court. In an era when falling out of favor could mean death, exile, or forced ritual suicide for an entire family line, Munenori's descendants continued to serve the shogunate in positions of trust for generations afterward. His life itself had become the ultimate demonstration of his own teaching. The Heiho Kadensho endures today as one of the foundational texts of Japanese martial philosophy, studied not only by practitioners of Yagyu Shinkage-ryu, but by strategists, business leaders, and martial artists across disciplines who see in it something far larger than sword technique. Its central insight, that true mastery lies in reading a situation so completely that force becomes unnecessary, has outlived the age of the samurai by 4 centuries, translated and reinterpreted for readers who will never hold a katana. What made Munenori dangerous was never his blade. Any competent swordsman in Edo, Japan could cut down an opponent. What made him singular was his refusal to let that ability define him. His understanding that the highest use of power is the discipline never to need it. In a violent age, he built an entire philosophy and an entire career around the radical idea that the greatest victories are the ones no one ever sees happen. The Yagyu Shinkage-ryu school Munenori helped shape still exists today, its techniques and philosophical texts preserved and taught across Japan and internationally. His descendants' domain, Yagyu, Yanagi, is still remembered in local history, and the family crest can still be found on historical sites near Nara. Centuries after his death, martial arts scholars continue to debate and translate his writings, finding new relevance in his central claim that the sword's truest purpose was never to end life, but to protect it. There's a lesson in Munenori's life that transcends swordsmanship entirely, that true expertise is often invisible, expressed not through dramatic action, but through the countless conflicts that never happen because someone skilled enough recognized them coming. In an age obsessed with visible strength, Munenori built a legacy on something far harder to demonstrate and far more valuable to master: the wisdom to know exactly when not to draw the blade at all. 400 years later, in a world far removed from castles and katanas, Munenori's central question still applies to anyone who has ever faced conflict. Is your strength measured by what you can destroy, or by what you have the wisdom never to need to? The samurai who trained 3 shoguns and never once needed to prove his blade in mortal combat left behind an answer that still unsettles anyone who assumes power must always be shown to be real. Next time on Samurai Chronicles, a single letter written in anger and pride that a lord sent directly to Tokugawa Ieyasu himself and triggered one of the most consequential wars in Japanese history. Naoe Kanetsugu, the retainer whose defiance lit the fuse of Sekigahara. If this story of restraint, wisdom, and quiet mastery resonated with you, subscribe for new episodes every day. Next time, the letter that started a war, and the man bold enough to write it, Naoe Kanetsugu.